Well, welcome everybody. My name is Payman. I'm the liberator of the Freedom Law School and the Freedom Church. We have a special event for you this evening. We have a guest from out of town who is a true freedom fighter. He's a true statesman and true American in the sense that he just doesn't talk about honesty and decency in the American way. He actually puts the work through and has paid a heck of a personal price as well to make sure that the freedoms that the Founding Fathers intended us all to have will be returned once again and maintained for our children and our grandchildren as well. He is a former congressman from the state of Idaho. His accomplishments are many, but amongst one of them, I think probably the one, in my opinion, is where he is the one that actually started the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that was passed last year by Congress. It was actually a watered-down version of what Congressman Hansen originally started years ago in Congress that they now passed. Okay, it was because of him that we have even that level of protection. He was also in Iran during a hostage crisis, went back to talk to the Iranian government and got the Iranian government's agreement to release the hostages. Okay, and it was Jimmy Carter who actually messed everything up. Okay, and he went out there and made things happen just because he had the decency and the courage to go out there and do what no one else would do. And he's got a very special message to share with you today. So please help me give a warm hand of welcome to Congressman George Hansen.
Can you all hear? Good. Kind of strung out. I think some of you are bashful back there. It's good to be with you, and I'm glad you'd spend this Monday night, come out, visit about the things of our country, what's not right about it, what we can do about those things, and so forth. My mouth's a little funny. I had a little dental problem, and so I might mince a few words unnecessarily, and I hope you don't mind. But I'm real pleased to be with you, and you're just a warm, great group of people. And I think as long as there are people like you in this country, and I've seen them from coast to coast, the country's really in better hands than we think. And we do have a good future. The only thing is that it's like a lot of other things. They kind of get out of hand unless you take time and tend to them. And I think that most of the problems in this country, there are some things that are done by design. Certainly there are people that do crooked things. There are a lot of evil people in the world that will take advantage of a thing. I think the biggest problem we have, they say there's two kinds of sins. One is sins of commission, and other is sins of omission. And most of us, I think, are more guilty of kind of letting things ride, letting things happen that shouldn't happen because we're too busy to deal with them until they get out of hand. And I think that's what's happened to our government. Our founding fathers gave us a beautiful promise, a beautiful dream, and really a beautiful government in the Constitution of the United States. And in setting up the functional part of that government, I think we had some very good people that steered it on its way. George Washington, a lot of other people who are very creative in their ideas. They weren't selfish. They didn't want to be king. Should be a president. President should only serve so long, and people should have the right to participate in government. If we all participate to a degree, then it kind of belongs to all of us. But the trouble is, it's become professionalized over the past few years. You have the professional bureaucrats, you have the professional politicians, and a few people get in and they stay there and they stay there, and the rest of us sit there and watch what's going on. And you think, well, you know, they can't be as bad as it looks sometimes, but some of them are. And it's really, you know, a problem. So I think the problem we have today is just kind of repent a bit and say, hey, this is our government, this is our life, this is our future, and the future of our children and their children, and we're going to do something about it. And I think you're kind of on the front of the awakening. Now, I know people come to me and they say, well, is it too late? Can't do anything about it. I say, no, it's not too late. Because there's one thing about it, and that's the Lord God has promised us, in any kind of religion you talk to, that in the end He will come and He will reign, and He will reign personally over this earth, and those of us who are here and those of us that return. And so I think we just have to remember that it's like a movie. You know it's going to come out all right. It's just the process of getting there that becomes a little heart-wrenching, a little disturbing, because we go through a lot of problems, and some of them are of our own making. And some of them are of our making because we let somebody get away with something. So I feel that the end of the movie, so to speak, is okay. Now we just have to decide if the Lord's going to win and the devil's going to lose, which side we're going to be on, and how fast we're going to help the good things happen that have been promised to us. And I'm not here to preach religion, but I am here to preach hope. I'm here to preach the fulfillment of dreams. And I guess I'm one of those people that feel that as evil and corrupt as this government gets sometimes, that the flag of the United States of America, which I was born under and raised under and believe in, and I believe in the American dream, that flag, with your help and my help, will be here to usher us into that great day when the Lord comes. And that's as it should be. The Lord doesn't build on chaos, He builds on order. And all you have to do is look at the planets and the universe and everything that the Lord builds, from the tiniest microscopic thing to the largest things, and you see that it is a work of order. And I think if we're going to be about the Lord's work, we need to work in a way which is orderly and which makes sense. I know there are people get frustrated and they say, well, we're going to have to do something very drastic to get this country back on the high road. I honestly believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the provisions are here, that if we do such simple things as implement more fully the 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, which says that all things not specifically prescribed to the federal government are reserved, those powers are reserved to the state and the people. And the problem is that there are a few people, for the sake of convenience, the sake of doing things rapidly, and they don't want to go through 50 state legislatures or through 3,000 counties. What they do is they want to do everything in Washington. But there's a terrible price to pay. In my state, for instance, we have an awful lot of resources. And when we let things be done in Washington, that means that the people in Kansas, in North Carolina, New York, and Illinois can decide how we're going to use our land, how we're going to live our lives. And it's the same thing that happens, to you folks here in California. And so the principle of the 10th Amendment, which means keep government as close to the people as you can, is very, very important, because some very big decisions are taken away from you when you have them made in Washington, D.C., 2,000-3,000 miles away from you, and where those people who vote don't have to live with what they vote. For instance, it's very easy for a congressman in North Carolina to vote to set a lot of land aside in California or my state or somewhere else, because he doesn't have to live with that. He doesn't have to live with the problems it might create with those people that it displaces or whatever. So here we come down to an application of what's been going on today. The last few years, and I've been a victim of it, and a lot of you have, and the trouble with a lot of things that have been happening is that it happens in isolation. When the IRS comes to your door and picks on you, not everybody knows about that. And they don't know about the unfairness of what maybe happens. And so these injustices go on, and it's hard to get anyone's ear. And the government's been very clever, and the people who have created this mess have been very clever in some of the things they've done. For instance, it's the old Hitler technique of divide and conquer. And what they do is in the Internal Revenue Service, for a good example, is You have about 70% of the people in the country are on a short form. They work 9 to 5. Their lives are relatively uncomplicated. They can file on a postcard, you know, and things like that. And they live next door to a guy that's in business or on a farm or has other complications where he has to file a long form with the IRS. And that man has holy hell because he has to justify all the deductions. He has to be subject to audits and all of the things that the IRS can do to people, and some of them pretty treacherous. And so he sits and wrings his hands and he says, well, boy, I just don't know what I'm going to do. They're just putting me out of business, or, you know, they're giving me a good wringing out. And the guy next door who pays on the short form, you know, he says, well, I don't know why you have trouble. I don't have any trouble. If you handled your taxes like I handle my taxes, you wouldn't have a problem. Don't you run into that with people? They don't understand. They don't want to understand, because if they understand, that puts them under obligation to do something about it. And it's easier to close their eyes. And the psychologists of government know that if they can get 2/3 of the people to close their eyes to the plight of 1/3 of the people, that you're outnumbered, and they can beat up on that 1/3 and nothing happens. You know, that's what's been going on. And so you find instances right and left where you find the assault of government hitting people, and the guy right next door doesn't even have any sympathy. You have a fallout with the government somewhere, and people say, well, you must be wrong. You know, the government can't be wrong. And I grew up, like a lot of you, with the Lil Abner syndrome, where when they say U.S. government, I stand and salute. It's respect. And up until the late 1960s, that's the way government was. It was kind of like the friendly cop on the corner. You could go down and the IRS guy would help you fill out your taxes. The traffic cop would say, hey, weren't you going a little bit too fast? Well, yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking. I was thinking about getting to work, you know, and so forth. Well, look, slow it down, take it easy, you'll live longer, and so forth. You used to have that kind of thing happen. Not today, because they're on a quota. The only way they can look like they're busy is how many tickets they turn in. The only way the IRS can look like it's busy is how many audits they turn in, how many seizures they make, and all of that. You know where that came from? It came from a thing called the Merit Pay System, Merit Pay Act. And what it was intended to do, and it sounded good on the surface, is to reward good servants of the government for being good workers. You know, pay them for doing a good job. But how do you measure a good job in an enforcement agency? And you measure it by the amount of people that you pick on, the amount of people you beat up on, the amount of money you assess, the amount of seizures you make, that type of thing. And so, all at once, government is measured by the things it does that are unpleasant and disrespectful and even downright treacherous and dangerous to the public. And so, all at once, we find ourselves with a government that is not our servant, that is not the friendly cop on the corner, but our fearful master. And you have every agency of government anymore arming itself to protect you from somebody on the outside? No, to turn the guns on you, to protect them, the government agents, from the people they serve. And when they come to see you, do they call you up and say, we'd like to sit down, have you come in and sit down and talk about a problem? No. First thing you know, at midnight, you have the door bashed in, and you're rousted out of bed, handcuffs thrown on you, you're thrown on the floor, and that's the government. You know, the old story of the guy in the SWAT team, or the SWAT uniform, standing there with his Uzi, and it says, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. And that's pretty chilling. And so something has to be done to stop this. Now, we've had the ACLU and Amnesty International and all these organizations that for years have been parading and prating about the fact that they're here to help you in your civil rights problems. But find them when you need them. You know, they're not there. Oh, now, the ACLU, they'll take care of a lot of liberal problems. They take on some causes that really benefit a few people or the liberal concept. And once in a while, they'll throw one the other way. And on the Ray Bream show today, we were talking about that. Because when you talk about the ACLU, yeah, they'll throw one the conservative way once in a while. Way over there, when they try to fight for the Nazis have the right to march in a 4th of July parade or something like that, you know. And so that just mocks what conservatism is to begin with, and it makes people think, well, we cover the board. Well, you don't cover the board. You play from here to here, you know. There's an awful lot going on in between. So when I ended up having my little fun in prison, and believe me, I've had 20 years of that fight. First 10 years was fighting to stay ahead of them, to beat them, and we did. We beat the IRS when they came back at me because we brought them to accountability for the things they were doing to people. We got the Taxpayer Bill of Rights on the table, and Taman, we did pass a decent Taxpayer Bill of Rights years ago, but then they keep passing more and more, and that's where the water down happens, you know, is they keep adjusting it. But there's no way to reform a skunk, you know. And we had a damage control operation going on for a time trying to deal with it and tame it, and one of the ideas was at least make them accountable. Second was to have a flat tax where it basically let them tax income, but don't let them make a social project out of it where they gouge you for so much and you for so much, you know, for the social projects. But there was no way to deal with that snake, and that's been pretty much over for a long time, and that's the problem. You get some people still living in the past, like Dick Armey, the majority leader in Congress, who's pushing the flat tax concept, which I initiated at that time. And he says that'll replace the IRS. It doesn't replace the IRS, it is the IRS, you know. And so that doesn't really help. You have the other gentleman from Texas, Bill Casey, who he has the idea of dumping the IRS and getting away from audits and April the 15th stuff and all of that, and coming back with a transactions tax, a sales tax. Well, there's no tax that's pleasant, and there's somebody going to find something wrong with everything. But I think we're going to have to get Army and Bill and some of these other guys together and say, look, there's a common enemy out there, and that's the Internal Revenue Service and what they do to you and the violation of your right to privacy and your freedom in that concept of taxes, and whatever we have to adopt, temporarily or otherwise, is worth it to get those guys out. And so I think we can do that by 1999. That's why my phone number is 1-800-400-1999. And I've been in a lot of projects, ladies and gentlemen. We've never failed. I took OSHA to the Supreme Court. We beat them. They thought they could come in on a businessman without a warrant based on probable cause. We proved to them before the Supreme Court that you have to have a proper complaint, or you have to have an accident that's so clear that you can get a warrant, but you can't just get what they call a wallpaper warrant and walk in anytime you want. But it's so easy for the judges to roll over when a federal official comes up and says, I want a warrant. And what the judge needs to do, and this is the idea of preserving our rights at home, is say, on what basis, what cause, and then use the fact that he is a judge to decide whether that warrant ought to be issued. And so there are ways to protect us. Now, what's happened with the federal government is they've got this whole thing upside down. A few years ago, it used to be that we believed in the English common law system of government. We believed that the supreme law enforcement in the land was the county sheriff and the county prosecutor. And that the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, the FBI, those guys, they maybe had a little power in those areas where the Constitution allowed it, but they did not have power over local law enforcement. But all at once you get this problem of a guy from Washington saying, Sheriff, I want your help. We want to organize a SWAT team. We want to go in on this. We want to do that. And I want to deputize all you guys as federal marshals, you know, so we can do that. Well, all at once they stand 10 feet tall and say, boy, Uncle Sam wants me, you know. He's not thinking of what he wants him for, to go beat up on your friends and neighbors. And they ought to say, whoa, you know, we don't have to join your operation. And we're not going to join your operations, just like the gun battle not too long ago, where the sheriff could stand up and say, I'm not going to do your work, Uncle Sam, about the registration process under the what was it, Brady Bill, yeah. And so you can stand up to him, but it's hard. You can stand up to him in OSHA, but it's hard. It costs you money. But if you don't stand up to him on each of these little fights, it gets out of hand. and then it's a big, big battle. And that's where we are. Now, when we formed this U.S. Citizens Human Rights Commission, it was for the idea that we're not going to operate outside the law. We're not the renegades. We're not the people trying to subvert and invert this government. We are the people that want the government to operate as it was founded to do, and that means to adhere to the principles of the Constitution. Real free speech, real government at home, 10th Amendment, all of this sort of thing. Well, so how are we going to do it? And people say, oh, we can't do it. You can't fight them. Yes, we can. Because what happened in Oklahoma is a good example. When you had the federal grand jury, as the feds always do, they jump in and they muscle the local law enforcement aside because they have more money and more power in the bluff sense. And so they muscle them aside. So here's the sheriff sitting there scratching his head. You know, he's better equipped because he does it all the time to take care of murder cases or any other very serious felony type case. But he gets muscled aside by these guys who don't do it all the time. And I talked to the Oklahoma authorities, for instance, and they said, well, they muscled us aside. We've probably solved a lot more of these heavy cases than they have, but the FBI has the money and the travel privileges and all these things to do some of these things, which puts us in an awkward situation. So get aside. It's like that. Well, here came a young man by the name of Charles Key, who said, that isn't the way it's going to be. And he watched the federal operation where they only took what they wanted to see. Bill Clinton was real quick to jump out and say, this is the right wing, and the right wing talk shows that's caused this climate in this country, sowing hate, seeds of hate. And so he fingered every one of you folks in here, people like myself, people like Ray Bream. We're all hate sowers because we don't agree with what they're doing. And so Clinton did it, and all these other people did it, and they were trying to marry it to Waco and reaction and all that sort of thing. And they had all of us pretty much drawn and quartered, hanged in effigy, or however you want to put it. Got a singing mic here. Anyway, the point I'm getting to is that Charles Key saw that they were steering around, they were slanting the testimony, and those who testified before the grand jury, they were playing to the stands. They were going to give a couple of sacrifices to the bloodlust of people for the great wrong that was done. So they picked these two guys, McVeigh and Nichols, and fed them to the wolves. Well, you know, it appears those guys were up to their ears in it and probably got what they deserved. And I'm not here to retry that. But what I am here to say is that it wasn't that simple. And when you look at Bobby Kennedy's murder and Jack Kennedy's murder and Martin Luther King's murder, they never solved those because they tried to oversimplify. They stuck out a sacrificial lamb of some sort and would not get to the bottom of it. And so they're still arguing about what happened to President Kennedy. They're still arguing about what happened to Bobby Kennedy. In fact, the guy that supposedly killed Bobby Kennedy is now saying, well, I don't remember anything. You know, I don't remember doing that. And so it never gets settled. And then the same thing, Martin Luther King. You know, they're talking about this thing happened a different way. So I went to the Oklahoma authorities and I said, do you want this to be another one of those eternal mysteries, or do you want to solve it? And, you know, they don't want it to be an eternal mystery. Well, when Key then saw that the federal government was messing it up as usual, then he said, well, from his study and from the study of some friends of his, that they had the unique capacity in Oklahoma, I think there's one other state like that, where they could have concurrent grand juries, federal and local. And so he took that. He had to fight all the way to the Supreme Court, the Oklahoma Supreme Court. The Oklahoma Supreme Court said, agreed with him. Then he came home. By then they'd ganged up on him, and it only took, before that, 200 to 400 signatures to call for a grand jury on a petition. Well, all at once they changed it, so it took 5,000. And so he showed them. He went out and got 13,000. You know? But they make it tough. And then we went down there to solve another problem, and we were faced the idea that you have to find twice as many signatures on a second grand jury within a year as the first grand jury required. That meant that we were going to have to get 10,000 instead of 5,000 in order to solve this drastic murder case that we've been talking about. So we had to get a little bit smart ourselves. And so when Mr. Key, and this is not disparaging, when Representative Key got through with this thing, he'd gotten the privilege of having a grand jury. And the problem is, at some point, you have to turn the grand jury over to work with a prosecutor. And who did he have to go with? He had the governor of the state, the former federal FBI guy, I think, and so forth. He had him, and not a cooperative man, not somebody that was very kind toward Mr. Key, and so he had that choice. He had the state attorney general, and that guy had been vicious with Key, tried to even put him in jail over how he raised his money to support what he was doing. And the third one was the local district attorney. Well, he decided that out of the choices he had, which wasn't much, kind of like a dog chasing a car. You cut the car, now what can you do with it, you know? And so he and I talked about this, and I said, well, let me go down and talk to the prosecuting attorney. Well, you know, sometimes God is real good to you. He's been good to me twice, 3 times, 4 times, more than I can number. One is the Supreme Court decision that got me out of that place was a gift from God. It happened not because I asked for an overturn of my case. I'd already gone through that years before. And the Supreme Court had tap danced around it and said, no, that's a political case. We're not going to address it. And so I sat there, fought with those guys in and out over a 10-year period, and finally somebody, the Justice Department, decided they were going to reach in and do something to the court system that they'd done to the Congress when they got after me. And the court said, no, you're not going to do that. And then somebody on the Supreme Court said, well, if we're going to stop the Supreme Court from jumping the Justice Department from jumping the fence against the Supreme Court, we're going to have to also stop them even-handedly for doing it against Congress. And then somebody said, but if you do that, you got to overturn Hansen's case. And so I got a backhanded bit of justice out of that because they were trying to save their own backsides, and they had to give me, you know, the golden ring with that one. But I call that a gift from God because that was something that they didn't try to do. It just happened, you know. So, and when I say another gift of God, it's because when I walked in the prosecutor's office in Oklahoma City, we went down there on the 24th, Pete, I think, wasn't it, 24th of June, not long ago. And there they were in this muddle. And I went in, Pete Martin back here from this area, and I went in as officers for the Human Rights Commission. We saw the district attorney, Mr. Macy, and his chief of staff. We thought we'd be in there maybe a half hour or so. We were in there over 2 hours. And what happened is it turned out that Mr. Macy and I had worked together in the Department of Agriculture back in the Nixon administration, way back, and we knew each other, and it was just like, you know, meeting a brother. And so we had a very, very warm meeting, a good meeting, and we sat there for a couple of hours, and we basically solved the whole thing. In other words, what was his attitude going to be on the grand jury? Well, I had to oppose the forming of that grand jury because as the district attorney, I had to represent the courts and the establishment, and they didn't want it. Now that it's done, I'm kind of glad because I can get back in the pictures that the feds muscled me out of, okay? Well, that's something that nobody really counted on. So when we went back and told Mr. Key that he would be happy to let anybody with any meaningful testimony testify, which wasn't done before, he would reach an extradition to go overseas and pick up people that you needed to get. He would fight with the feds to get the witnesses that they were trying to cover and protect. When he got all of that, and he said, have Mr. Key send in his list, anybody he wants, you know. And so I went back, and I think it was just too good to be true. It took a little while to convince him that really he had an open door. I said, hey, man, you've won, 120%, you've won, you got it all. Quit worrying, you know. But it's taken a little while, I think, for the new to wear off on that one. But sometimes it's hard to shift gears. You're so used to fighting, it's hard to recognize that maybe you finally won. And it's a few times you win, sometimes it's hard to recognize it. So anyway, that grand jury is going, and there are people that have complaints I hear about, but I feel, being as close to it as I have been and still am, that we need to cooperate and make it work. Now, I know some people say, I'm not going to appear there, or nobody should appear there, or whatever. Well, that's stupid. Now, for instance, General Parton, I asked him to go get acquainted with the prosecutor, and I made it a point to be in Oklahoma City to sit in on that. And you know who General Parton is. He's one of the leading munitions experts in the United States, an Air Force general. And I wanted him to sit down and get acquainted with the district attorney and tell him about his theory for the explosion. And, of course, it's fairly well known, but not everybody reads what's available. So, and he makes a very, very good case and a good presentation. Well, I had to persuade him a little, because generals like people to come to them, you know, and so I had to convince him that it would be a good idea to invest a little time and a little money to go down, because he probably could get some doors open, and he sure as heck hadn't been very successful before, because they had frozen him out of the federal grand jury, and the defense had been scared by the prosecution and not allowed him to testify on anything in the McVeigh trial. So about the only act in town that he could catch was this streetcar right there, and you better grab it. Well, anyway, he got in there, and I mean, he was impressive. He knows what structure a building has, how much concrete it's placed in certain ways, the reinforcement of it, what it takes in terms of munitions and bombs to blow a hole in that, to blow up, to blow down, to blow sideways, or whatever. And he made a very impressive presentation, no question about it. And I think he did himself some good, and hopefully people aren't going to talk him out of going into the grand jury, because they think maybe the grand jury won't give him a good ear, because he'll never know if he doesn't go. And so, anyway, there were some things he talked about. Some of you haven't probably heard much about, but I'd like to share it with you for a moment if I can. One is that some people say, well, a fertilizer bomb doesn't blow up, blows down, blows a hole, you know, whatever. Well, that's true. And it takes a very different kind of bomb to blow out and blow clear to the back of that building like it did, and to blow the whole top front of it off. And how did that happen? Now, so we speculated, we played with it in there. How would it happen? With that much fertilizer, which is about 1/4 what it would take in terms of TNT to do the job, which it would take some 15,000 pounds, that they didn't have sufficient force to do it. How did they do that much damage to that building, internal and up? And how they did it, it was, General Parton said, well, you can go into a crawlway and you can plant explosives under the T-bar that holds the building up, and you had 4 anchor bars in the building, and you plant an explosive near or under it, blows the thing off its pins, and it's weakened the structures, moved the building off base. And so he said you could do the same thing if you take a satchel or a briefcase full of explosives and put it against each one of those legs of the building and have it all go up at once, basically. They knock the building off its pins, and then the big blow outside brings it down. And he said that's the way it could be. Now, what that did is open up an argument that we need to have opened up. Because some people say, well, McVeigh and Nichols did it. Well, that's dumb. Those guys didn't know munitions that well. They maybe could do certain things that they were asked to do. But you think I need rescuing?
Hey.
Thank you. Anyway, a lot of people didn't realize that it was more complicated than that. So that would take somebody that really knew munitions, like General Parton himself. And that would take somebody that knew that he had to have a force here and a force here at certain critical points, a force here and here, and they had to blow at a certain timing and everything else. Now, there are people far away from that explosion that said they heard 2 distinct explosions. And maybe there are even more, but 2. So if they were real close, you probably didn't even hear one, because it knocked your ears out before the explosion really had its impact on you. So I guess the point is that it was entirely possible that there was a series of explosions, all programmed to explode pretty much at the same time, that only a person far away could detect, you know, the difference in the sequence of time. And so the reason for that was to say, okay, It's not enough, just like on Jack Kennedy and these other cases I was saying, it's not enough to take a couple of quick fixes like McVeigh and Nickel and throw them to the wolves and say the problem's over. What it is enough is that we say, okay, there's some mastermind, some smart guy behind it that set it up, and those two might have been a couple of errand boys. They might have been involved to a degree, but somebody else was hired, or somebody else was there with a vested interest, a terrorist or whatever, to do that job and sow the seeds of hatred and disruption in this country. And put one American screaming at another American. And really, that's what they accomplished. And so, and they can play on some suckers. There's stories around that the ATF knew about this, and some of them stayed away from work and all of that sort of thing. Well, that may be true. There's stories about the fact that it was a sting operation where the explosive wasn't supposed to go off, and that they were going to capture the perpetrators in the act of trying to set off a bomb that wasn't going to explode. There's all kinds of stories. But the point is, you'll never know what the answer is unless you get everybody that knows something about it in and get the story on the table. That's why I told General Parton it's very important that if you're going to get any possible conspiracy theory in there, that it has to be that you have to show the possibilities that it was more than a couple of local yokels with a fertilizer bomb on that thing. So anyway, I thought you might like to explore that thing just a little more deeply. And we've tried to open the door so that we could have that kind of thinking and that kind of opportunity for putting in information and have it tolerable, because some people get impatient. They say, oh, that's a wild goose chase, and they don't want to listen to it. And it's hard for them to vote to allow somebody to testify or whatever. So we tried to jazz it up a little bit, you know, to get something so people would see some possibilities in some of these theories and want to check them out as far as they could go. Well, in the process, we asked Mr. Macy, I said, I'm down here particularly because there's a very ugly murder that's occurred in the federal prison transfer center at Oklahoma City. Now, some of you don't know, there's two prisons in Oklahoma City. There's the big old El Reno prison about 25 miles out of town. And then there's this new transfer center that's really state-of-the-art. It's right on the southwest corner of the Will Rogers World Airport. And that sits out there like a fortress in the flatlands in the cow country of Oklahoma. It's 7, 8 stories high out there. And it's big enough. It doesn't have a fence around it, no wire or anything. Everything is compressed inside like a fortress. And the airplanes, the federal marshals, you know, they have one of the largest air forces in the world now. They fly prisoners all over the country. It's big business. The more people you put in jail, the more business the federal marshals get. And they transfer prisoners all the time for state as well as, for federal as well as state and local governments. And so it's like a hub, like you have in Los Angeles for some major airlines, like you have in Salt Lake City for Delta or Dallas for American and so forth. It's a hub, and they come in there and they house prisoners for a couple of days and exchange them, send an airplane this way, an airplane this way, you know, to take them where they want them. And the airplane taxis off the field right into the prison. That's the kind of operation it is. Now, this prison is considered to be a state-of-the-art prison. In other words, they say it's suicide-proof. They can't do things like that. And so the first thing that happens, and I've been there. I was to El Reno when that was the transfer center, and I was there when I came home 3 or 4 years later. I was at the new one. And so I've been there. I know exactly what's going on. In fact, the warden, the acting warden on duty the night of this killing was my old warden from Petersburg, Virginia. So it's a small world. And so I guess all I'm saying is that I know a little bit about the way that thing is laid out and what can happen and what can't happen. All right, here's the thing. Had this guy picked up here in Orange County. His name was Kenneth Michael Trenadu, and that was about 2 years ago, about from this time on. And he was picked up because in his younger days he'd done something pretty serious. He'd helped hold up a bank or something in the area, and they gave him 20 years. And after 7 years, they let him out on parole. and and uh, and he pretty much behaved himself. He got married, he had a child, he had a job, and everything else. One incident, 2 years after he was out, he told his parole officer that he was nuts when he said, "You can't have a beer." And because there is a rule on parole, you don't have alcohol. Okay? So he said, "You can't have a beer." And so he quit reporting to the parole officer. He said, "I'm not going anywhere, I'm not running, I'm just not talking to him." You know? So 6 years later, they decided to run him in. So they came and picked him up. So here he had 7 years in prison, 8 years out, and they finally picked him up on a 6-year-old difficulty with his parole officer. And they sent him to the transfer center in Oklahoma City. He was waiting for a few days to have a hearing on his parole there. That long ago, and under those circumstances, he thought he might have to go in for a few months, maybe 6 months, to square it with the government, and then he'd have it behind him, and he could get on with his life. So he wasn't in any panic or anything else. It was probably, he felt a good opportunity to get it over with. Well, when they got him there, within 2 days, the warden called his mother and said, "Your son has hanged himself with a bed sheet." Well, after they got in and looked, the place they said he hanged himself was a ventilator made of plastic against the wall, no way to hang anything on it, and it was covered with dust, like nothing had ever touched it, you know. And so the point is that the warden said, "We'd like to cremate him and send his remains home." And the mother said, first she started to say yes, thought that was a nice gesture. And she said no. She said, "We'll take care of our own." And they called several times and tried to get them to allow the cremation. And they tried with the state medical examiner to get him to sanction cremation. And they tried to change his name and list him as a derelict so they could sanction cremation. But it didn't happen. And so they had to send the body home. And the reason they wanted cremation is because they didn't want the evidence to show. They were trying to burn the evidence. It's illegal and unlawful for the U.S. Bureau of Prisons to pay for the interment or the cremation or anything of an inmate. So they were trying to do an illegal act to cover themselves. And then when they sent the body home after about a week of hassling, the people here in Los Angeles area, in Orange County, they took a look at that body and something was wrong. And they saw thick makeup all over the body. And they started scraping it off, and they found, after they decided to clean him up, that the body was covered from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet with massive bruises. He'd been beaten terribly. And so then they started digging into it, and the man's brother is a trial lawyer from Salt Lake City, which fortunately happens to be in the state of Orrin Hatch, who chairs the senatorial committee over the Department of Justice. And so being an attorney, and Hatch being an attorney, and being from Utah and all that, he got Orrin into it, even though Roaring Orrin has become Purring Orrin in the last few years. But nevertheless, it did get him in, and he started asking questions of Granite Reno, Stonewall Reno, you know. And she was really putting on the Stonewall, saying, "Well, we have a grand jury going on that, I can't talk." Well, that's 2 years of not talking, you know. And it's a pretty clear-cut case of murder, open and shut, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. So anyway, this guy decided he would start taking pictures and looking into it, and then he decided to file a civil suit against the government for a violation of civil rights. Sometimes you can't get them for murder. A few years ago, I was involved with, there were 2 prison lieutenants, guards, on a bus. And there was a fellow there with a lazy kidney on the bus being transported from a jail to a prison. And a lazy kidney is, if you get traumatized, you cannot go to the bathroom, you know. And so this guy said, "I've got to go to the bathroom." So the way they do on those prison buses, you're in chains, hand and foot, chained to your waist, and they grabbed him and yanked him down the aisle and traumatized him good, and he got there, and of course he couldn't get any results. And so finally he came, sat down again, and pretty soon after he relaxed, then he needed to go again. And they repeated the process. Third time, he said, "I've got to go," and they said, "You're not going to go." And he said, "I need to go." And of course the language wasn't nice, but that's in essence what it is. And they said, "Well, you just go on yourself because you're not going to go. And he said, hey, expletive, damn it, I've got to go. And so anyway, what happened then was they got a roll of duct tape, and you all know what duct tape, that silver tape, and they mummified him, wrapped his head in it. And they put it around his mouth to shut him up, and of course they weren't careful what they did around the nose, and some of the other people sitting on the bus said, you dumb so-and-sos, you're going to kill him. Well, they got off the bus and had a smoke for about 20 minutes and got on, and he was dead. And then what they did is put those rest of them on the bus on diesel therapy. In other words, diesel therapy is you're on a bus or an airplane that runs on diesel fuel, and they keep you on the road so that nobody can get to you by phone or letter or anything else. Well, so that's how they covered it up for several weeks until they had a hearing that determined that it was an accident. Lots of accidents in there, And so it's just to show you that these guys do it, and they cover up. And you'll find once they do something like this, and they get in trouble because they've overdone it, and they killed or hurt somebody badly or something else, then they'll say to their friend, well, I covered for you last time, you've got to cover for me this time. And so it's one of those buddy systems where they do that sort of thing. And this cover-up has gone all the way to Janet Reno. Well, okay, so this is what happens with the system. Now, they went in, and obviously, when they started looking, they found that his head had been crushed in 3 places from being hit with metal batons. They found his throat was not only cut, but ripped out by a garrote, and they found that he'd been hit in the face, in the head, time and again with a stun gun. And for some of you people who don't know, that's about 40,000 volts a hit. It'll turn your brain to jelly pretty soon. And his shoulder, and his tailbone, and so forth. And so they just tore him to pieces. And then when they were confronted with this, they said, oh, that was self-inflicted. He had big bruises under his arm where somebody held him. Well, now we have found out, because we went there and we got Mr. Macy, said we're going to offer a $10,000 reward. And we got a lot of people around to sign pledges to help us, and we're going to offer a $10,000 reward for anybody that steps forward and helps us to find who did this nasty thing. Because if they can do it to him, they can do it to anybody else, especially if they get away with it. So I said to Mr. Macy, now, where do we go since the federal government's bottled this thing up? Where are we going to go with the information we developed? And of course, we knew what we were doing. And he said, right here, I'll take care of it. That's the district attorney. Now, he has to do that in the face of the federal government, and that's not easy because those guys can put the heat on you, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And so I said, well, what about a grand jury? He said, I'll take care of that. We'll put it on the bombing grand jury, or we have another one going on. We'll see that it gets where it belongs. So there in a period, Pete and I were there, a period of 4 days, we got 2 grand juries on track. We got this wanted thing going. We got this case on track where the local authorities would take it on, take it out from under the federal government. And it's because they should have been doing that. This is the 10th Amendment. We're not asking for some independent group of posses or anything to come in. We're talking about enforcing the law that exists and making the federal government live with it also. And if those guys, like in Ruby Ridge, if they can shoot a woman and shoot a son, and if they can come down there and maul a guy till they kill him and get away with it without any charges of murder, there's something wrong in the law enforcement system of this country. I don't care if they do wear a federal badge. And so what we did was get on track, a means of having whoever knew something about it be able to report it to somebody, because where would they go if the federal government was trying to cover it up? Nobody else would listen. And so we fixed it, so we had the carrot and the stick approach. How do you do that? Well, if a guy's sitting there and he knows what happened, and he does have a place to go, then if he doesn't go, he's guilty of what? Obstructing justice, isn't he? And you can go to jail for that. And so what we did is give him an incentive, $10,000 if you'll step forward. And if you won't step forward, you might get hurt anyway. So that was kind of interesting about what possibilities opened up. But then the next thing I did is I went over to a local advertising agency. I said, would you design a poster for us? And when they found out what it was for, because there were apparently a bunch of renegade federal employees out at the prison and we were trying to identify them, oh, we don't want to get involved with the federal government. And so all at once they didn't want to have any part in it. So what did they do? They got me kind of a maverick ad man and signed me up with him, and then he came back and had them design the poster. That's kind of, you know, there's two kinds of ships in the ship of state in Washington. There's statesmanship and chickenship. And we have a lot too much of the latter. And so it's because people won't stand up. Now, after we got it done, we got it running in a newspaper, the Oregon Observer, front page, looked real good, told the story. And we thought, okay, now we'll deliver those around the airport area of Oklahoma City. And so I went to a delivery service. So I gave them a check, all set up to go Wednesday morning. And I called a little later on Wednesday and I said, well, did they all get out okay? Oh, the bosses came in and they got into a parley and they decided that they couldn't handle that. You know, so again, how do you make justice happen when people are afraid to stand up? And that's happening far too often. So who did I get to do it? The Boy Scouts. Because those little entrepreneurs need to make money for their scout activities, for their troop, and they'll go deliver anything, you know, just to make some money. And so it's real interesting what you end up having to do to bring justice, and it's interesting who has the guts to do it. And as the Bible said, a little child shall lead them. You know, there it is. They maybe don't know enough to be afraid, but God bless them, you know. Well, anyway, that's the kind of thing that's been going on. So then we finally, the brother had, through affidavits and so forth in his civil lawsuit, had been able to chase a few leads down and got those people on affidavits. And I have something for you back there that's an 8-page story about what's been going on. Now, after we were there and opened the door, the chief medical examiner for the state of Oklahoma, a highly respected man, God bless him, he stood up and said, I guess he thought, well, it was about time. He said, we've got to have a grand jury, a local grand jury. Oklahomans need to do this. The federal government won't do it. The federal government's been stonewalling. They won't talk to me, the medical examiner, or anything else. He said, we need to have a local grand jury, and it needs to be the bombing grand jury. Does that tell you something? You know? So anyway, the next thing he knew after sounding off for 2 or 3 days is here comes the FBI with some papers and serves it on him. So many words told him to shut up. And what it was, of course, was a subpoena, I think, for another grand jury appearance. But the point is, they have a way of pushing people down. Now, this guy isn't about to be put down, because after that happened, there was a big story in the Oklahoma Eagle, and that was on the 17th, a few days afterwards, which they told the whole story, and where he really let them have it. He said, when I was in the top floor in the special housing area where they kept these special prisoners, he said, when I was there 5 months after the fact, when they finally let me in, when they wouldn't let us in at the night when the crime was going on, he said, I was looking at the room and I spread the phenol around so we could see how much blood was in there. He said the place lighted up like a neon show, and showed that the blood had been all over. We have one guy who's testified that he mopped it up, and he literally had to mop it. There was so much blood. And this medical examiner said, while I was there, one of those high-handed guards came by, and he said, you can shove this investigation, and you know, you heard the expression before, and it wasn't even the nice way of putting it. It was the ugliest language in the world. And the next guy came along and said, if you think, he said, you might find things in here, but if you think you're taking them out of here, you've got another thing coming. Really, threats, intimidation. They thought they had a little empire there and nobody could touch it. Well, the law says in Oklahoma that a federal prison and a state prison and a local prison are all subject to a local grand jury for inspection and whatever, and they don't have the immunity they think they have. And so it's nice to use the law. And so what happened is we have the doctors speaking out. We have the inmates speaking out. And we just got one where this inmate, and he's in prison for, I think he picked up an exotic bird, I don't know, a parrot or something, when he was 19 years old. And then they came and checked his house out, broke into his house, and found he had a gun that was properly registered, but he's been in prison for 11 years for a bird and a gun infraction, you know. But here's a guy who's pretty brave. And by the way, that's why you can't afford to have these guys mess with your guns anymore. If you just have a gun that's your grandpa's old relic in your house, and you live 1,000 feet from a school or whatever, they can nail you for that. You can go to prison for that. They have made having a gun a felony, and a serious felony, almost, well, it's worse than robbing a bank or beating up on somebody or violating a child or anything else, because those guys get back on the streets in a couple of years. This guy's been there 11 years, but he had the guts to testify before the grand jury and tell them exactly what happened. He had come into that prison 1 month after the murder, and he had been run around by those same guards that had intimidated the doctor. And the one guard had said, if you don't keep your mouth shut, if I can't depend on you, he said, you have no place to go. We'll kill you, just like we killed Trinity. And that's in there, in the testimony. So we know certain people, what they did, and so forth. We've got it. And then another witness who we found in Pennsylvania. The government transferred these guys real quick, all the workers and everybody else, tried to get them so that nobody can quiz them. Well, this guy heard about it, and you know, that they were looking for somebody, and so he volunteered and gave a notarized statement under threat of perjury and so forth. He told about the fact he had the cell next door to this man when it happened. And he said that there was a SWAT team went in, 8 men in their Ninja Turtle suits, you know. They were dressed up just like these SWAT teams of all, only they called them something different, a security force in prison. But they were a riot force, and they had riot weapons, and 8 of them went in that cell. And there were already other people like these other 2 or 3 guards in there. So there was probably as many as 11 people, 11 prison guards in that cell with Trinity. Now, he was a macho guy that worked out. He had a 19-inch neck. He didn't pick fights, but he wouldn't run from one. And he probably would take on any 2 or 3 guys that pushed him. But here they came in, and this prisoner said the inmate in there was begging for mercy. And the guy that mopped up the blood said there was blood all over the wall, all around the panic button, they call it. It's the button that asks for emergency aid in case there's a problem, and he couldn't quite touch the button. And so the point is, they beat him up good. They held him, and they beat him with batons. They slit his throat. They hit him with the stun guns and all of the rest of this stuff. And he came out of there, of course, just a pulp. And he said he heard the beating. He saw him drag this body, bleeding body, out across the floor. Well, that's a testimony in what we have back there that we'll share with you. I just want you to know. Now, there's a little bit of pretty bad prison language in there, so you might be a little careful who at home reads it, because the truth is the truth, but on the other hand, sometimes it's not pleasant, you know. So I want you to know that that's there. So what we have done is we, in an effort to help Mr. Macy, who does have to fight these federals off if he's going to take this case, and you do have the FBI messing around like they do and so forth, we told him that we hope they'd move swiftly. And there's 12 people that we suggested ought to be picked up for murder. The 12 people are the 8 in the SWAT team. And it's known who they are. They're right on the roster of the time clock for that night. There's this guy named D. Champlain that you'll see in there, and a couple of his John Doe cohorts. That makes 11. And there's one more, number 12, and that is the temporary acting warden. And this warden, as I said, was a female warden from where I was before, and she was there all night long. She was the one that helped deflect when somebody called 911, and the ambulance came, and they had 20 minutes. They sat out there for 20 minutes waiting for those guys to call him in to do business for the guy, and they finally come out and said, he's dead, you can go. So they could have saved him. She could have saved him. So there's 12 people, 12 apostles of the devil far as I'm concerned, who need to be brought to accountability for killing this man. There's nobody, even though he wasn't that big a problem, but there's nobody needs to be treated that way. And in this system where a judge prescribes the punishment, they have no business taking that into their own hands. And they did. And then there was the cover-up. The people for months that have been covering it up won't come forward. This could be, if they really go after it, this could be a very, very big scandal. And Miss Reno could be tap dancing her way back to Florida pretty fast. So what we're asking of you, why we're here in Orange County, partly is we'd like you to take a petition, if you will, and if we don't have enough back there, we'll make them off, and, you know, they're easy to Xerox, make them off from the copies you have. And what this says, and I'm going to have to cheat and get my glasses out. That's legal for old guys, isn't it? Anyway, what this says, emergency petition for justice and defense of human rights. We, the undersigned, do strongly and urgently endorse the efforts of the U.S. Citizens Human Rights Commission to, 1, demand the arrest of the 12 federal prison employees who brutally beat Kenneth Michael Trenadu of Orange County, California, to death in Oklahoma City on August 21st, 1995. 2, demand the prosecution of all others in the U.S. Justice Department who have participated in the torture, murder, and obstruction of justice and the 2-year cover-up of this brutal crime. 3, demand that those honest and brave enough to defy the cover-up and present the testimony and evidence to expose the killers be placed in protective custody to prevent the deadly reprisal and revenge of those who would kill or harm them. I mean, tell you, when you're in there and you're telling the truth, accidents happen very frequently. And 4, demand that Congress investigate and hold immediate hearings on these crimes of violence and cover-up by the U.S. Department of Justice. Now, this can help a lot because we can get this, we can show, first, it ought to help with the news. Something like this always becomes a bit newsworthy. Either here, and we did have some of the major newspapers in today talking, I don't know how much they'll do, but a little continued pressure will help. Mr. Trenadu, when this first happened, he put a picture of his brother on a billboard, laying in state. Put it on a billboard out by the airport, Lax. And he said that really brought a lot of mail into Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer and some of those people. And so there's some of you today have said, well, I'd like to take this and go into Congressman Rohrabacher or, you know, somebody else and say, what about this? What are you going to do about it? Well, they ought to go to the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House and the Senate and say, hey, you know, this kind of stuff's gone on long enough. And so you can put the pressure on Congress. And by signing this thing, this will help us to show the local district attorney out there that the people in the hometown of this man want some action. And that's why we thought it would be a good thing here to get you folks to let him know with several thousand names that the hometown of these people have an interest in this. That'll keep the pressure on him to do something and help him to have the strength to do it when he's opposed by the federals, you know, and whatever. So you can help a lot if you'll help us. Just sign up as many of these petitions as you can and get them in. There's no address on it. We weren't thinking very well, but there is an address for the Human Rights Commission on some of the other literature there laying there, and you can send it in. Now let me tell you something. We win one battle, and then we go to another. And to me, I don't like having a crusade of fighting the government. I'd like to go fishing. I'd like to do some of the good things that most people like to do in this life and not be spending time, and I know a lot of you would, not be spending time having to ward off the devils and the dragons and the alligators of the government. And so we feel that if we can make a good point in 2 or 3 places, that it will really help. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to win this case in Oklahoma. Nothing would look better than to have 8 or 10 or 12 federal scalps on our belt with the fact that they have committed murder and they have been apprehended. And that really would make headlines, and that'd give us a big start as a Human Rights Commission. And second, once we show we can do it, then we just go right on up to Ruby Ridge in Idaho, and we get the county to convene a grand jury there, and we take on those 2 or 3 guys that caused the death of those people up there. And that badge shouldn't protect them. You know, they have not been held accountable for the charge of taking a life, and in fact 2 lives. So actually we want to go to Ruby Ridge. Then we'd like to come right back down here and talk about Don Scott. And that's been on 60 Minutes. It's a known tragedy. It's known to have been wrong. Well, why don't we have it properly prosecuted also? And then we'd like to go to Waco and do some work there. And we can go back in history even if we get on a roll of this thing. You go clear back to Gordon Call and a few other places where some of these guys were made martyrs by the IRS. And so the point is, I don't know whether we'll win them or lose them when you get in the grand jury. But wouldn't it be nice just to feel that they have been called up to accountability? That's the main thing. And that if you can't get away with murder, and heaven knows you wouldn't want to, why should they? That's the whole thing. And I would, you know, if we can do that, then the next thing is by, in a few months, we can take on the Internal Revenue Service. And those people are symbolic of being the biggest purveyor of violence in this country. And they need to be taken out. And when that's done, if we have the kind of people in office through that election that need to be there to do that, you're going to have the kind of people that will deal with the Federal Reserve, the emergency orders of the President, and all those other things that are hanging there that bother everybody. And that's what we need, is to make those folks in Washington feel that they are beholden to the people who elect them. And make sure that they don't continue to think they can get away with letting things slide. Now, you know, they operate on fear in Washington. They have created all these dragons. And when I say dragons, I'm talking about a congressman has to report his taxes. And so he's always afraid the IRS will maybe come after him and embarrass him during an election. They tried that on me. They didn't get away with it, but they tried it on Senator Montoya of New Mexico, and they drummed him out of office. Senator Ed Long of Missouri, when they were calling him up on hearings and so forth. The point is that these guys are afraid of the government they've created. They're afraid of the FBI. They're afraid of the IRS. They're afraid of the rest of it. And they also are afraid of these special interest groups that put all this money into their elections. If they don't do what those people want, they're afraid they won't get the money to run on. So they are running on fear, personal fear. And there's only one way to make them beholden to you, who they really should be serving, and that's make them fear you more than they fear those people in Washington. And how do you do that? How do you do it? Just watch these guys come to a press conference or to a local town hall meeting or whatever. And don't go alone. But you and 4 or 5 of your friends who kind of have been up on the issues a little bit, you go over there and sit in that meeting. And then you say, well, Mr. Congressman, I'd like to know about why you did this or didn't do this or whatever. And then he and some of his friends will try to slide it by and say, well, we're not interested in that. We're here for such and such. But then the next guy of your friends stands up and says, well, I'm interested and I want to hear. The next guy stands up and says, I'm interested too and I want to hear. And he can't avoid it. And he's either going to be able to answer the questions and he's going to respond to you, or he's going to quit having town hall meetings. And if he quits having town hall meetings, he's not going to be available to be electioneering and voting. I mean, getting voted for. So the point I'm getting to is you do have control. Most people say, what can I do as one person? It doesn't take everybody. It just takes 2 or 3 people doing something at a pressure point at a certain time. And believe me, they say in Washington that they see the light when they feel the heat. And you can turn up the heat on them. So if there's any message that I have to leave tonight, it is a message of hope. A message that if we apply the principles of this government, like the 10th Amendment, and we go to the very laws that are available to us, such as the Oklahoma affair we've talked about, or what we can do in other places, we can win. If we handle our elected officers in the right way, like I've talked about, we can win. They're not ready for that. They can't handle it. And I'll tell you, a politician, I've been there, a politician's very sensitive to criticism. He's always testing the wind, you know. So don't think it's all gone. And you know, a lot of people think that you can't do anything about these things, and that these guys, these judges and these congressmen are God. Well, one guy, I know one reporter that went into a federal judge not long ago. He put the tape recorder on the table, and he was a fairly large guy, and he put the tape recorder on. He had a deep booming voice. He said, "Judge, I'm going to take you down." That judge, despite all the ways they stand and look so big in the pulpit up there, you know, when they're passing judgment on people in the chair, that judge was so nervous he couldn't pick up the pencil. These guys put their pants on the same way as everybody else. We've got people that we've been working on that have left public office because you print in the paper that we have control of. We don't control all of it, but we control enough. And you put in the paper what those guys, where they live, what they're doing, the fact that this is their fourth mistress, and you know, and all of those things that you've just put in there. Well, it's the truth, but they don't like it out for the public to see. And all at once, they just get scared to death. We don't have any privacy anymore. Well, welcome to the club, you know. We're going to leave. This one guy moved out, and he went home to live with Mama. And he said, "I'm not telling anybody what my address is." And so the point I'm getting to is these people are human too. Sometimes they act inhuman, but they're human, and you and I can take them down because they're more wrong than any of us could ever be. And that's... And just remember that there's nobody in this country has won anything by having the largest mob behind them. The founding fathers came together, 56 of them met in a little room, just a fraction of what's here tonight, and they gave us this treasure, this Constitution, the freedom we enjoy. And it just took a few planting the seeds, and it spread. It doesn't take everybody. The hippies in the 1960s, you know, they were misguided in the minds of us, but they were fighting something they didn't like, and that was the war, Vietnam. And because a few of them got very vocal and very imaginative about the way they expressed it in a lot of ways, next thing you knew, they had this government standing on its head over that war. Some of us didn't like it, but we learned a lesson, you know, because the lesson was, if you have a few people that will stand their ground, they can beat a disorganized majority any day. And Newt Gingrich is my last example. And Newt Gingrich, he marketed an idea called the Contract for America. Now, a lot of people have a lot to say about that, good and bad. But the point I'm getting to is that he sold the American people on the fact there's a better way, and here's a contract. And you had a Congress that had never been anything but Democrat for 50 years, and he turned it over in one election, just like that. Now, what he did with it since is debatable, but the point is he won on a principle of something that caught the people's imagination. Now, we have the greatest principle in the world. Our principle is free agency and privacy, the Constitution, and all of these things. Now, why can't we sell it? We can, and we will, and we are. And we don't have to have a majority. We just have to have a very functional minority that works hard, because the vast majority out there, they're busy paying their bills and playing and watching Saturday afternoon football and all those things, and they kind of sway with the wind. And what we have to do is just make the wind go the right way, and you're going to pick up an awful lot of them, not because of principle. I remember when I used to run, I'd go into I went everywhere to get votes, and I didn't have to do what they did there, but I went into the bar, and I'd go right down the line, and here'd be some guy sitting there, "Let me buy you a drink." "Oh, thanks. Got to move on. Got a lot of people to see, you know," and you go right through it. Get down to the end of the bar, and there's some lady sitting there, look at the thing, say, "I don't like the way you wear your hair," you know. And then next time, "Well, you look like a nice young man. I think I'll vote for you." But that's the way to the vote with some people, and it can be swayed. Abraham Lincoln would never have gotten elected in this day and age. He was too ugly, you know. And in this day and age of television, you've got to be some real pretty boy. and you might have an air head, you know, a head like a balloon, just full of nothing. But a guy gets up there and smiles sweetly, you know, and he looks so nice, he looks so honest, and he gets elected. And he's a disaster. And some of them are the product of a backroom bet, like Jimmy Carter. I have every reason to believe that the Trilateral Commission and some of the big bankers got together in a back room and they said, we can take a nondescript, one-term, failed governor of a remote state and elect him president. We'll show you. And so they took Jimmy Carter, who matched those credentials, and they sent him out early to Iowa, and they gave him lots of money, and he went out. He was a nice guy. He grinned pretty big and pretty. And anyway, what happened is he got to be president. One-term president, too, by the way. And so here's a guy that, boy, if I had another couple hours, I could wow you with some of the stories about how smart he was, but out of books, but how dumb he was in the school of common sense. You know, and my wife says all the time that there are too many people educated beyond their capacity. And common sense is a great asset. People that know how to do something, roll up their sleeves, know how to work, and want to work. You know, that's what the spirit is. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got tapes in the back of the room. These tapes will make you cry and make you mad at the same time. It's the meanest tape you've ever seen. It shows how the government lied on this murder. It shows a little bit of what I went through, and then it says, if they can do it to a congressman, what about the rest of us? And that's what the spirit is. And I hope that if you folks, if you leave here, I don't care if you reproduce it and pass it on to your friends, but get it out and get people mad, get them shocked, because it's that kind of thing that will cause things to happen in this country. People don't do anything. It's like the old dog sitting on his tail howling because it's too lazy to get up and get off his tail, you know. Well, we need to have something that motivates people to get off their tail and do something. And there's the old story, and you probably heard it 100 years ago, about the duffer, the golfer, that drove a bad slice right into the rough and right on top of an anthill. And that really sings to you. Anyway, he drove it out there, and he went out and he addressed the ball, and he took a mighty swing, and he missed the ball. But he bruised up about 5,000 ants. And then he took another swing, and he bruised up another 5,000. Finally, one old battered ant turned to the other, and he says, boy, if we're going to get out of this alive, we're going to have to get on the ball. Please take the story to the newspapers, to the congressmen, to your friends and neighbors. It's a shocker. If you ever read a shocker, this is a shocker. I challenge you to come tonight, and God bless you, all of you who came. It's a big hall. It doesn't look like a lot of people. If we'd met in the Yankee Stadium, it'd look smaller, but there's a lot of people here, and we're talking about right making might rather than the other way around. So you can do it, and you can start the ball rolling. We're going to go to the other side of Los Angeles tomorrow and tell it again. We're going to get it over to Oklahoma and other places. And I really think that the days of this Justice Department, the way it's constituted now, are numbered if we'll do our job. And we have to start somewhere, and this is a place we can do it. We took OSHA down in the Supreme Court. We took the IRS down in the Court of Public Opinion and got a Taxpayer Bill of Rights in. We need to now throw it out, but the point is, we can do the job. And it's not too big a job when you just go to people and say, do you believe in allowing government employees to murder the citizens of this country? And how can anybody say yes? And we tweeted a little bit today about the ACLU and Amnesty International. Well, there isn't any force that's for the people, for protecting the people against a runaway government. That's what we hope to be, the U.S. Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Now, believe me, you know, Federal Express, what do they call it? The Federal Express, but it's not federal. It's just a name. But it sounds good, and a lot of people go to them because it sounds official. Well, what we did, we got tired of having the liberals take everything away from us. So we decided we are not the U.S. government. We are the U.S. Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And that's more official to me than the government, because you, the people, are supposed to be the boss in this country. So, ladies and gentlemen, help us spread the petitions, help us tell the story. If you can, buy the tapes, contribute so that we can keep this thing going, because we're going to take this bunch down. We're going to do it in the next few weeks and months, believe me. And all I can say is I love you. I love you, and I want to tell you that there's one little adage that always impresses me. It says, "No man escapes when freedom fails. The best men lie in filthy jails, and those who cry, appease, appease, are hanged by those they sought to please." And I don't think any of us are going to wait for that day. God bless America. Thank you.
Folks, before you go, let me add a few things for you that I think you wanted to know, and some of you didn't hear about George. I don't think he quite shared with you that George, when he was a congressman, he was kidnapped by the IRS. He was set up by the federal government and put in jail and tortured. How many of you knew about that? Can I see show of hands? Yeah. Now, I hear a lot of people in the freedom movement, and then George and I talk about this, telling us that, you know, it's either one or two things people say. They say either, oh, it's not that bad, which I don't think we have in this crowd, or people say, you know what, I'm afraid I don't want to go out there and make moves because I'm afraid they're going to come after me. Well, if you feel that way, let me share this with you folks, okay? Some of you don't know this, but I come from Iran of a Jewish descent, and I had my relatives tortured and executed by the government of Iran, accused of being a Zionist spy or corrupt on earth. Now, how do you define a Zionist spy? Any Jew in Iran qualifies. How to define corrupt on earth? Anything you want it to be. And I came to America to find freedom, like what you're looking for. And here's what's going on. The IRS has labeled me as an illegal tax protester. Another illegal tax protester. And I asked the IRS attorney, well, who made that determination that I'm an illegal tax protester? Based on what law? Based on what facts? When? You know what he tells me? I don't know. Says, I don't know. You know, quite frankly, you know, it's not a, you know, we have I asked him, well, do you have a book? You have me, scheme number 51, you have me listed, and the information I got from you through the Freedom of Information Act. What is scheme 51? He says, well, it's just a figure of speech used for internal purposes of the IRS. Illegal tax protester, right? Now, and we're supposed to be meeting, by the way. We're doing some, I'm involved in a suit for them, we're in discovery right now. We're supposed to meet and exchange information. And the IRS attorney is afraid to meet with me anywhere outside the federal building. Because I don't want to go to their building. I don't want to be blown away. Right? Really, you know, I'm not kidding you. You know, those buildings are dangerous to walk into. And I talked to him, I said, well, why don't you want to meet me at a Denny's or the local district attorney's office or something? You know what he tells me? We just want to be careful because we heard about you. Well, what have you heard about me? You know, well, we had this incident. They're talking about the incident when I placed under citizen arrest about 15 IRS agents in Laguna Niguel. And we had, I told them, well, yeah, that's right. Your agents would not follow the law, and they were thieves, so I arrested them. So what's the thing? You want to come after me? Go ahead. Let's go to expose it more in the public, right? My point is this, you guys. I can do this in America. Why? Because it hasn't become as bad as Iran yet. And I think what you don't want to do is to make the mistake of give up your power now and saying, what if they come after me now? Because if you wait 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it will not be much different from Iran, where they can pull you out of your car, shoot you on the spot, and your relatives don't even dare complain to your congressman. Think about that. In Iran, when they kill your family members, you don't even dare complain to nobody. Because you make noise, guess what? We're going to have to get rid of you too. Now, the American people still have the power. You guys still have the power to get America back, right? Okay, that's why you saw the yellow tapes out back there. That's George's speech he did last time he was in Union City. And I tell you, George was very tired today. This is not the usual George. He actually does a much better job, in my opinion. And he gave a dynamite speech in Union City last month where we made copies of it available out there for $3 each, or $2 or $10 for $20. We made it available cheap to get it out to everybody. Why? Because I tell you, this is the way we're going to get America back. Let me see a show of hands. Can we have it quiet at the back, please? At the back, folks at the table, could you guys keep it down, please, or take a conversation outside, folks? Thank you. Do you guys know how in Iran the Shah of Iran came down and Ayatollah Khomeini took over power? Well, let me ask you, how many of you have cars with cassette players in them? Can I see a show of hands? Look around. How many y'all got cassette players in your car? Well, in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini passed on the audio tapes of his speeches he gave from exile, passed it down to the mosque, the churches of Iran, and the clergy there played it in their churches and told the people, and got people excited, got people mad. Now, this is stuff that makes people mad, right? Now, why are the churches in America quiet? Right? IRS? Well, they need to get going, right? And who's going to get them going if not you? Okay? That's how the Shah of Iran came down. So many of these audio tapes of Ayatollah Khomeini were passed out and heard in mosques, in people's homes, that people got mad and millions got in the streets and brought down a dictator. Now, if you could down a dictator who shot 200 people on the street one day when they were demonstrating. In the beginning, he did stuff like that, but he couldn't stop it. He killed hundreds of people. He still could not stop the revolution. In the streets, he killed them. What is going to stop us? Now, George has a video available out there. You want video of today? Dennis is making them available out there. Our videographer, the forms for it are out there. They're $10 each. 5 or more for $7.50, 10 or more for $5. You can get the videos, order it from Dennis. Okay, he's right here. You got the form. And or get the audio tapes. You guys, we'll get him these stuff out to you. And here's what you do, folks. Okay, take the audio tape to Sally Soap Opera, neighbor of yours, or Joe Sixpack, friend of yours, right? How many of you got those people? I mean, I'm tired of folks. I hear that from people. Oh, my neighbor don't listen. All that. Nah. All you got to do is tell them is this: look, Joe, I respect your opinion. And could you keep it down at the back, please, folks? At the tables? Thank you, guys. Tell them, look, I respect your opinion. Would you do me the favor and listen to this and tell me what you think? Because I'm thinking about getting more of them. Okay? And and now, who's going to tell you, when you tell them that you respect their opinion, for you to get lost, right? I mean, so often in the freedom movement, we don't use common sense in dealing with people. Everybody's going to say, sure, right? When you pay them a little true compliment, okay, yeah, you do respect their opinion. They're going to listen to it. Put it in your car on your way to work, right? They're stuck in traffic. It's only an hour speech. Play it in your car and tell me what you think about it tomorrow. Ask them about it. Hey, so what did you think about it? Do you think is it something I should get and get more of this to get out? And you're going to find out so many of these Sally Soap Operas and Joe Sixpacks, your friends and family and co-workers that you gave up on and you thought, they don't want to hear about that stuff. They'll listen to you. You know why? You're right. They don't read. They don't read. These people are illiterate almost. But they will listen. You got to get that message of George Hansen out there to these people. Listen, get in inbox and then turn them on. Okay? You got to be the leaders of influence. Why can't each of you be another George Hansen? Who do you think appointed George Hansen to be who he is? himself. And if you believe that you can do it or you cannot do it, you are right either way. And I'm going to leave with you what Winston Churchill said because when he became Prime Minister in England to beat Nazi Germany, England was losing. And he said something very key, which I remember every day. He said, better fight when your chances of winning are small than having to fight when your chances of winning are none. English chance of beating Nazi Germany was small during the Second War. They were bombing London. That's how bad the Nazis were beating the British. But he became Prime Minister, said, let's go for it. Let's